And it does this by switching on some incredibly powerful chemicals, our sex hormones.
They're not visible. That's the problem with hormones. You cannot see them. You cannot touch them. But what we need to understand is that without hormones, we don't really exist.
Hormones are our chief administrators. They are constantly patrolling the body, checking and regulating every function.
Hormones are actually agents of change in the body. They affect the way we think, they affect the way we look, the way we interact with each other, and certainly the way our lives unfold.
And when our three sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are switched on, hold on to your seats, because things are about to get a whole lot more interesting.
Puberty is the time when we go from being children, asexual, to sexual human beings, which is very important because if we don't make that transition, our species would die out very quickly.
Odessa is 12, and for her, this transformation into puberty is already underway. One of the first things hormones will do is make her grow faster than at any other time in her life.
About the time of puberty, there is an enormous rush in terms of bone growth. We get a huge increase in the length of our bones. So this is our sort of shooting up phase.
In just 1 year, Odessa will grow as much as 3.5 inches, about the size of this heel. By the end of puberty, she will have grown a whopping 9.8 inches, which would be the equivalent of donning a pair of swanky platforms this big. And Odessa's body fat will increase by even more, 120%. During her peak weight gain, she can put on 1.5 pounds a month. That's the weight of 3 packs of butter, like this. And over a year, this would come to 18.3 pounds, enough to spread over 1,600 slices of bread. Yet the amount of hormones needed to bring about a change in our bodies is 100 times smaller than a single grain of sand. Imagine making a dose of hormones for every girl on Earth. Amazingly, you would only need a pile this big, about 7.5 pounds worth. But hormones don't just make us bigger. They literally transform us into adults.
The girl starts growing breasts, she starts getting hair in her pubis and in her armpits. She starts thinking differently, she gets her period, and she starts becoming a woman, meaning she starts ovulating and she starts being ready to reproduce.
At 12 years old, Odessa's ovaries already contain 300,000 egg cells. And now, one of them will be released each month. The egg can develop into an embryo if it's fertilized. If not, it's replaced by another the next month. In her lifetime, a woman will release about 400 eggs. But there's more to this roller coaster ride than physical transformations. By the time a girl reaches 15, like Frankie here, her hormones have begun to affect dramatically the way she sees the world. And that, combined with her changing body, can open up a whole new frontier of priorities.
They're trying to override what their body, their hormones are saying in order to fit in. Perfect example would be young girls developing anorexia and bulimia because they're afraid to move on to the new body.
This is probably the most extreme reaction there is, but the developing woman has a great deal to contend with. She'll sprout hair where she doesn't want it, and her skin becomes oilier. It can be a traumatic time, and many never forget it.
One day I could look in the mirror and be like, wow, like I look really fit, like I look really good. And then the next day you look in the mirror and you're like, what the hell happened?
Just the awkwardness that you have like during puberty and stuff.
Getting really big hips really quickly.
Never having clothes that fit well.
Pimples are the worst. They change and they come at the worst of times.
Some teenage girls experience fatigue, mood swings, and irritability, which can lead to tears. A lot of tears. Up to the age of 12, boys and girls cry about the same amount. But then, as a girl's hormones flood in, she begins to cry more. And by the age of 18, girls are crying 4 times more than boys. Not surprisingly, we cry most when we're sad. 49% of our tears. And 10% when we are angry. But 7% of our tears are out of sympathy. 5% from anxiety, 4% from fear, and the good news, 21% out of happiness. Of course, tears are a small price to pay for the myriad of changes that await a teenage girl as she moves into womanhood. But what about the boys? Well, they too are about to undergo an alarming makeover. And when their testosterone is increased by 30 times, it's safe to say that all bets are off. It's often said that boys like action. But one thing's for certain. When their testosterone hormone kicks into gear, they're in for a hell of a ride.
Suddenly, the pituitary gland is sending messages and saying, wake up testes, start making testosterone.
And they do. In fact, a maturing boy's testosterone levels can rise by 30 times. This is a strong mix, but testosterone is such a powerful chemical that the amount of it in a boy's body is minuscule. Its concentration would be the equivalent of dissolving a single grain of salt into 60 pints of water. And if you add up the amount of testosterone inside every man on Earth, you would only end up with this amount, 76 pounds worth.
The real surge of male hormones occurs around the age of 13 or 14, which sends boys off on a completely different route from girls.
Will and John are 16 years old, and testosterone has been busy transforming their bodies for over 2 years now. For boys, the first signs of puberty are the testicles growing bigger. And they grow from 1.5 cubic centimeters to 20 cubic centimeters. That's 13 times larger. Then, a boy's penis starts growing, and by the age of 18, reaches an average length of 6.5 inches. But not long before then, boys have already begun setting up sperm-making factories, each producing 300 million sperm a day. In less than a month, a boy will have created more sperm than there are people on the planet. In their lifetimes, Will and John will each create enough sperm to populate this many planet Earths. 571 of them. But they're never going to achieve this unless they're able to fire them. And to do that, they need an erection. The average male has several each day, and while sleeping at night. And he has an average of 7,700 ejaculations in his lifetime. But the question is, exactly how much semen does this add up to?
Perhaps a liter or 2 of semen.
2 gallons.
I'll say 3.5 gallons.
50 gallons?
60 gallons.
I'll just say a pool's worth of semen.
A few Olympic swimming pools.
An ocean.
An ocean?
It may come as a disappointment to some, but in his lifetime, a man will have spent around 7 gallons of semen. But that's not the only thing teenage boys produce during puberty.